Okay, I want to get us started with the seventh edition of our Leading Patriots series webinar. Today, I'm really thrilled and honored to be joined by such an illustrious panel of educational experts in that K through 12 space. Really looking forward to today's, what I think is going to be a very vibrant discussion about what is going on in the educational sector, what sort of disruptions did COVID have in this sector, and what's the future for K through 12 education in the United States. Once again, I am your host, Brett Josephson. I'm an associate professor of marketing, and I'm the director of executive development within the School of Business. A little bit about what our schedule is going to be for today. I'm very lucky to be joined by a colleague, Dr. Maureen Marshall. She is an assistant professor of education leadership in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. She just joined us last year after a very illustrious career as an educator in the space. She has been a principal, assistant principal, and a teacher focusing on special education, both across Virginia, into even some time in Hawaii we were talking about before. So really excited to get her moderating the conversation with our three amazing panelists. Dr. Phyllis Piardo, who's the superintendent of the city of Fairfax, Jennifer Schaefer, who's the principal of Shingle Creek Elementary School in Orange County, Florida, not Orange County, California, for those of us on the West Coast, and Jesse Kraft, who's a principal at Coates Elementary School in Fairfax County. Jesse, do you want to take this time to say congratulations on winning the Washington Post Principal of the Year Award? That was announced a couple days ago. So, all of these amazing groups, they've been connected with Mason. Their schools have been major feeders for our graduates in terms of coming in and getting their teaching license, but they also all have ties back to the university of being alumni. So really excited to have this conversation going on. For the audience, we do want to make them available to you, so feel free to ask questions during today's moderation or during today's discussion using either the Zoom Q&A chat feature or the physical chat feature. Both Maureen and myself will be monitoring that throughout the time to be able to interject your questions to the panelists. Just real quickly about executive development and this idea of this partnership and where this series came about. So one of the things that we do at executive development is try to be the bridge in when you graduate from George Mason and throughout the remainder of your career. We bridge back the capabilities and learning potential from George Mason, the university, to you, the mid-career to senior executive. Our purpose with this very ties into the Alumni Association, which has this view of once a Patriot, always a Patriot, that the university makes a commitment to you from the time you first stepped foot on campus until the rest of your working life and beyond, that we are with you, that we are going to be there to provide networking, to provide career assistance, to provide professional development. And so in collaboration, the Alumni Association and Executive Development got together to create this series, which was the Leading Patriots series, to highlight key Mason alumni who were in select industries that were going through enormous disruption and change due to COVID-19. And the idea was to give them a voice, and a platform to discuss those challenges that are going on within their industry. All this ties back to what we're trying to see as our vision and mission at both the Alumni Association and the School of Business and George Mason itself, of connecting with you and making that commitment as you go through your careers. So really excited to get this series continued to build out and continue to develop it. I do want to thank Jen Robinson and Michelle Murphy on the advancement team for all their support in getting this up and running. So with that, I do want to introduce our panelists. And Maureen, I think you could step in here as this. And I think one of the things I want to ask is, could you give a little bit of a background on yourself, more than I did, in terms of a little bit of your background, but mostly, I'm wondering if you could tell just very quickly what your most embarrassing moment as a teacher was. So we'll start with a little levity into the conversation, but what has happened to you if you think back of a time in the classroom that you'd say, yeah, that didn't go the way that I thought it would. So how about Phyllis? How about we start with you?
Oh, just one embarrassing moment. So let me just quickly give just a little bit. I believe the first question was just tell a little bit about ourselves and get to the embarrassing part. So folks that are listening in, you just have to wait a minute and then I'll get to the embarrassing piece. So thank you again for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be right here in the backyard of George Mason, as that's where the city of Fairfax is located. I am a native Virginian. I grew up in the Tidewater area. UVA was where I went to college for my undergrad, but after graduating from UVA, I came to Fairfax County and was with Fairfax County for 35 years as an elementary teacher, elementary administrator. I worked in HR and instructional services. And while I was actually in the classroom, I was able to get my master's from Mason. So I was a full-time working adult with going to school. I had classes and courses on grounds. My continued connection with George Mason is one of our schools, Daniels Run, actually has interns from George Mason, as well as 3 of the schools in which I serve have a partnership with George Mason Athletics. And so students baseball, track and field, and we had a informal partnership with wrestling, come in, mentor our students, read to them, sponsor events. And so there's a continued connection with Mason. When I think about my most embarrassing moment, it is when I was holding a parent conference. I had, it was one of my challenging students that helped me to grow as a learner and a leader. And I had ongoing communication with the parent. The dinosaurs were not roaming the earth, but this was pre-email and pre-cell phones. And so I called the parent pretty often, and she came in to pick up her child on a particular day. And it had been a very challenging day for us. And she said, did the child have a great day today? I just started laughing hysterically. I could not stop laughing. It was just hysterical because it had been one of those days. And so I regained myself, regained my composure, and we both had a good laugh. And we partnered and continue to partner for that student success. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. Jennifer, how about yourself?
So I graduated from George Mason in 1998. I came from the Tidewater area as well, and then went to Mason from 94 to 98. I actually had my undergraduate in public administration. And then the day I graduated, I moved down here to Orlando. And from there, I actually was a stay-at-home mom and decided once my boys were old enough to start school to go into education, and that's what I did. So I worked through Orange County Public Schools has an alternative certification program. I went through that, and then my 5th year in the classroom, I became a full-time student for my ed leadership through the Florida State University. So I spent about 6 years in the classroom and then have been out ever since. I was a teacher, a district coach, a district administrator, and I just finished my 4th year as principal at Shingle Creek Elementary right in Orlando, Florida. And my embarrassing moment was my first year as a teacher. I taught in a portable, and it was before some of the safety measures that have come into play. And I had called a parent, first year teacher, I didn't know any better. I called the parent during class and said that the student was having a hard day. And the dad said he would be right up there. I didn't realize that meant literally a few minutes later, the front office called and said, so-and-so's dad's at the front, we're gonna send him back. They sent him to my portable, and there was a knock on the back door, and there was a father ready to take care of the situation right then. So I definitely learned my lesson as far as when to call parents and when to literally open the back door. Obviously, since then, that was 13 years ago, things like that would be allowed to come, but definitely a learning experience as a first-year teacher.
Oh, thank you. My mouse is going crazy on me. Jesse, how about you?
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me. My name's Jesse Kraft. I am the proud principal of Ludi Lewis Coates Elementary School in Herndon. And prior to that, I was the principal at Providence Elementary School in Fairfax City, where Dr. Pichardo is. This is the completion of my 24th year of service in Fairfax County Public Schools and my 11th year as principal, and it's all been great. I grew up in Philly, I think I had said that, and moved to Fairfax County to get a teaching job because that's kind of what everybody who came from Pennsylvania did, because there wasn't jobs there, there were jobs here. And fortunately for me, as I was moving through teaching, I think just like Dr. Pichardo as well, Mason, basically our neighborhood university, had a great program for leadership and administration that I could attend and get my endorsement to be an administrator. I've been lucky enough to serve as an administrator in 3 schools that were part of George Mason's Professional Development Schools Network, and to host interns and pre-service teachers who were going through their internship or student teaching requirements. So that is my proud history with Mason. As far as embarrassment, I guess this story isn't about one specific incident as it is about my entire first year of teaching. Recently, I got together with my former roommate from my first year of teaching, and we got hold of our lesson plan books, our old school paper lesson plan books from our first year of teaching, and just laughed about how terrible our plans were. And it was just hilarious. Referencing packets of work we were going to give kids, or pages in textbooks, numbers of problems to assign to kids. I remember a couple lessons were basically crossword puzzles and word searches. And it was just, a lot of these things were taken right from what we thought the curriculum was at the time. It wasn't just us. So it's laughable to think back of what the expectations were for our instruction compared to what it would be as our careers went on.
No, that's great. If I think of my first time teaching and I think the over preparedness you do as an instructor at any time for your first class. Maureen, do you want to take it from here and give a little bit of background on you, and then we can I'll let you take the reins moving forward.
Great. Yeah. What an amazing panel we have, and what amazing leaders you have here today in front of us during an unprecedented time. My stories are similar to all of yours, not knowing enough as a first-year teacher. I did start my first year in Hawaii. So I was introduced to geckos and what little children could do and where they could put geckos for a beginning year teacher. So I learned a lot about those little lizards, and that you should never kill them either, because they eat cockroaches. And cockroaches are an important part when you're living in Hawaii, and they like to eat crayons. So enough said on that. So we'll get going here today, and I'll throw out the questions, and like Brett said, we have both the chat box and the question and answer box. So if our discussion for our participants is going in an area that you would like some more information, I would welcome you to please use those boxes, and we will tailor our information to get you all for almost a full hour and to share your knowledge with us. We're really quite fortunate. So I'll kick off with a question about really when the pandemic hit. What was it like for you and your school district? And then how did you shift your gears and change your gears to make sure that your operation kept going? And we'll start with Jennifer there, since you're our furthest participant away right now in Florida. And Florida seems to be a few steps ahead of where we are right now in Virginia. So I think that's an interesting kind of place to start. Jennifer?
Okay. So here in Florida, we were actually in Orange County. We were actually on spring break when our governor said that we weren't going to come back. So right away, our district worked to put packets together, as far as at least for the initial mail out. And then as our governor, and actually I'm in a K-5 school, our district 6 through 12, students already had the digital devices at home from the district. So with that said, elementary packets were formed at our district office and mailed out to certain schools, and then schools were to supplement. So my school then immediately started to shift and seeing, okay, what is this going to look like? We started getting out as far as Big Blue Button is a platform that we use, trying to get teachers ready for that. And then once Florida started to shut down a little bit more, I'm lucky enough to be at a school where I was allowed to distribute digital devices to our students. So students were then, teachers did did exactly what I wanted them to do. They rose up and they began to form digital lessons and have, class virtual time. Students were allowed to pick up their laptops, mainly in 4th and 5th. So it really shifted to a virtual platform. We still offer the paper packets, but right away we continued up instruction all the way up until until May, which school ended here. And right now my school still has summer school going digitally and virtually. So we're still offering that. So the change really took place from obviously that teacher in the classroom to that teacher available via the computer for those kids who had internet access. I'm at a Title I school. So we did have some issues as far as getting computers to kids, getting messages to kids, making sure that they were able to connect. We had a pretty good number of students who stayed engaged. I have a school about 880 students, and for the most part, I wouldn't say 100% were engaged, but a good majority were engaged through this distance learning.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jesse, I'm going to shift down to you there since your school seems somewhat similar, and you can expand on what it looked like for you.
Yeah, so when school closed in March, the first thing you deal with is confusion and denial and frustration and all the things that go along with that. It was crazy. And one of the things that was tough, besides the obvious, very real safety concerns, was just the situation changing so quickly that it was hard to get direction from the larger school system on what to do next or how long would this be, every single thing. So big announcements, changing all the time, watching your email into the night because there might be something new or radically different from what you'd heard previously. And in school systems like ours and like Jennifer's, these large school systems, it's really tough, I think, to make decisions that can affect so many people in such a large area. So the first part was getting through all of that. The other thing that I think went through a lot of principals' minds was, this seems to be this way. It seems like schools are going to be closed. It seems like we're going to have some synchronous and asynchronous distance learning activities for students. And do you start formulating plans for what that will look like at your school, or do you wait for more direction from the system? And that's tough. Ultimately, a lot of us decided to begin to put plans together and not make them so fully formed or so solid that you can't change. And I think that was useful. I think for a lot of folks who sat back and waited for a strict protocol or something, I think it may have cost them time, and time was of the essence once we got moving. So getting through all the confusion, keeping up with the communication, starting to make a plan, and then ultimately having it align with whatever the school system's approach is to this, whatever their requirements were for instruction for everything, align it to the system. And then it was just time to mobilize staff. What's the why behind this? You don't have answers for everything, but you have to communicate really actively. That's a challenge for any leader, to engage people and be there for them, but to not have answers for what their questions are, and to risk suggesting that we're going to do something one way only to find out 2 days later that's not the plan anymore. But you also can't hide from them or not offer anything. So it's this funny dance, and it's from the top all the way to the principals, all the way to teachers and their students and parents. We had to engage, we had to show people we're there and we're listening and we're learning and we're going to have something good, and bear with us. So a lot of that. Once things started to solidify and there was a distance learning plan, it was putting your own interpretation of it, professional development for your staff, putting a good, as you always do when you train your staff, what's the why behind this? What's it look like at our school? Operations things as part of the question, getting laptops out to kids, getting supplies to teachers, because when they left school, they found out once they were home, like, you're not coming back, it's over. So all of our schools were like these funny, stuck in like the day time stopped. It was almost, you walk in and it was like things weren't even cleaned up, right? So teachers didn't bring things home. They had to get all that stuff. We were extremely worried about social distancing, sanitization, all that. So working through all that and ultimately getting as fast as possible to providing some kind of instructional program for kids and communicating it appropriately for families. For anyone on the call who is a resident in Fairfax County and maybe you have students or you work in FCPS, I think you'd all agree with me. The most frustrating thing was about our synchronous learning charge because Blackboard didn't work as we had intended. And we went through a couple rounds of that and we lost a good 2 weeks of ultimately getting that right so we could actually implement the synchronous learning plans that we had intended to. So that was hugely frustrating. And if you were asking what was the biggest challenge, it was getting through that, but still reassuring teachers it's going to be okay, still trying to keep the momentum going with them, and still trying to keep parents and families connected because we built up to that and then we lost a lot of momentum. And so it was, how do we recover? Because there's still a lot of weeks left of school where we got to do something for these kids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a parent who shared that as well, and that trust level, and you both talked about that vulnerability. You're moving when you don't know what's happening, and then people are putting trust in you, and when things fail, how to rebuild that trust quickly because there's still ground to be made. So I'm going to shift to you, Phyllis, as a leader in the surrounding jurisdiction. You hear what the principals here are saying. How about from your end? What did it look like?
Yeah, so it's funny that the same kinds of things was happening, except it was at a different level. So this piece for us, spring break had not started as of yet. As a matter of fact, on a Sunday, we were notified by the health department that we had our first case of COVID-19 in our city. So we had to do a health briefing for the public. And at that point, and this was on a Sunday, and things drastically changed by the end of the week. You know, we were still thinking this is something about people traveling. This is not about school-age children. So this Sunday briefing occurred. It was important at this level to communicate regularly with the health department around what is the health data saying to us, and can we make any predictions about this? And even for the first case in the city, with whom had that person been in contact? For me, knowing it was someone who was elderly, I immediately thought, is this a grandparent? Were any children in the, was this person caring for any children? You know, where had this person been? You know, how we will do now with contact tracing. But that was on a Sunday. And on Monday, we continued school. We had meetings. I had a superintendent's advisory team meeting Monday night. We were moving along again, still tracking what was happening. And I think probably still somewhat we were thinking, that's happening in California. That's happening in China. You know, not necessarily putting it all together. And then Thursday night, an email was sent saying we'd be in school on Friday, and a few hours later, a teacher and a family in one of our, not in a city of Fairfax school, but in a Fairfax school who was a presumptive case, and all of a sudden it was things need to shut down because this is likely going to continue. And so that communication that both Jennifer and Jesse have shared has been something that our superintendents have, this piece around starting or waiting for direction, because we're part of a system of schools in Virginia. We did not wait for the governor's direction. Several schools in the Northern Virginia area went ahead and closed. And then the plea was to the governor and state superintendent, we're out here making these decisions on our own. We probably need a statewide decision. So the same advocacy and the same conversations that our principals are having with their staff, we're having it with state and local leaders. I would also say for me, it was working very closely with our city manager, the police, fire, and we had daily calls around what was the health department saying about the stats, where was this showing up in our community, and communication was difficult because there was probably a fear of, should we really be meeting together in person to have these conversations? But as educators, our work is relational. So of course we're going to have these conversations in person. And I think after day 3 or 4 of meeting daily, we said, you know what, we probably should actually put some distance between us. And that evolved. And so still communication and the thread of communication is important. We are doing it via all of the virtual pieces, very few face-to-face. Decisions are being made, and to make high-stake decisions when you've really been brought up to make a decision in person, looking at someone in the eye, getting the nuances of their body language has been an interesting lesson in human dynamics. And I am still learning how to make that adjustment. But still decisions have to be made. We have to lead people. We have to be able to, I think first some of the decisions, and then I'll wrap this up, were around kids' health, their safety, food and nutrition. And those were decisions that were made pretty quickly in terms of getting food to our students, making sure that they had their devices. I am fortunate enough, our high school was already at 1-to-1, our middle school was already at 1-to-1. So a big part of our community had devices, and even at the 2 elementary schools that I work with, the 6th and 5th grade was already at 1-to-1. But thinking about equity, having conversations, I think that is, I'll just move to the challenge. This pandemic has put a bright light for me on things that I thought I knew around access and equity, but things that I really can very clearly see now. I am thrilled that we've been able to have a virtual platform, but I still worry somewhat about many of our families and their ability to sustain themselves in what is an economic, a very serious economic downturn for us, and an unexpected one.
And Phyllis, you talk about equity and access and the light that has shined on it now, and that light is not going to go out. And I think we pivot as educators with what has been brought before us, with our challenges around that. And then we're also in the business of learning outcomes, right? So equity and access and learning outcomes, and what have we learned? And as we go forward, what does that mean for you, you all with teaching children? Because the end of the game is that every child succeeds, right? So how does that look? And are you thinking about that now? Because you have so many lessons learned out of these last few months. But when we move forward with learning outcomes for kids during this pandemic and moving forward, what do learning outcomes mean for you all in your schools right now? How are you communicating that with parents and teachers? And I'll start with you, Jessie. And you can feel free to also go on the challenges of learning outcomes too, because I don't know about your school system, Jennifer, but some school systems, it was ungraded work, right? So how do we know what they know? How do we hold them accountable for what they know? And obviously, as we wrap up this call at the end, we'll be talking about what's coming next with those learning outcomes as well. Jessie?
Yeah, I mean, the learning gaps are going to be significant. There's no secret about that. They're going to be significant for any kid, unless the kids took full advantage of all the things the school provided, and if the school provided extra, and if the parents did a whole lot more, because distance learning just isn't as effective as real school. I mean, that's just how it is. For certain students that we are the most concerned about, Dr. Pichardo talked about access, just putting an equity lens on this. There were a number of families who were disenfranchised from school pretty immediately, and it was very hard to re-engage with them and bring them to the fold, even with a good plan for laptop distribution, even with really excellent parent liaisons in our schools, at breaking through language barriers and cultural barriers to engage with people. But it was very, very tough, even with the county distributing MiFi devices for some families through an application process. It's really, really tough if your own literacy skills as a parent are very low. It's very tough if your living conditions make it so that even if the school provided you with a laptop and Wi-Fi access, you still can't get it done. And it's very tough if you have food uncertainty. And even with free meals that the county provided, and Fairfax County was excellent straight away with their grab and go initiative, there's still some very real challenges. And there are a number of kids. I believe it was mostly our Hispanic population. That's not to say most Hispanic or Latino students missed out on distance learning, but when the county was tracking, subgroups of students that we look at for accreditation purposes with testing, there were a number of Hispanic families that we did not reach consistently once we went into this. So that's tough. When we come back, that's going to be a really tough thing. There's an achievement gap we're always trying to bridge for underserved populations, particularly minority groups. It is really hard to narrow and close it, even under the best circumstances. And even if we had real school this year, summer would happen and we would have had summer slide. Now we have almost like a double summer in some ways for some kids. And it's going to take a lot of work to recover this. And obvious priority is academics, reading and math especially. And if we are back in school full time with kids, when and if that happens, how do we relook at our time so that we can give kids even more exposure to try and make up for lost skills in reading and math? But then there's also social emotional learning that is really part of school culture, whether you have an explicit program or not, that a lot of kids really needed and missed out on. And we need to do that all the time, but we really need to do it when we get back. And there's a human connection that kids make when they're at school. It's everything. It's the modeling of just how to be a great person, great empathetic person. It's the utilization and practice of your social skills. And all of those things we need to make time for when we get back, because those skills get rusty or they just go away. So a lot of what's on my mind is how do you relook at the instructional day so that you can really pay attention, and you can't throw your hands up in the air and say, well, we missed too much school, what are you going to do about it? It's how do we make up for all that loss, all that prime learning loss, whether the kids were engaged, a little bit engaged, or not at all in distance learning.
Yeah, some great points. Jennifer, I'll let you go on and kind of talk about where you see that in your district and how you're experiencing it as a leader as well.
So I think some of the things is really talking about equity. And I'm at a Title I school, and for those parents who, I have a lot of ESOL parents. And so not only is it just getting them the device, but really what support do they get at home? And then, yes, they went to these virtual lessons, but like you said, how do we know what they really know? And the real challenge is really making sure, looking at our ESE kids, how did our ESE kids, what kind of services, how far behind not only just our general population, but looking at those subgroups, looking at ESE kids, our ESOL kids, we have to get them back into the routine of coming to school and not just make up the work, but we still have to move forward. We have to move forward because it is going to be a new school year. And in Florida, as of now, we're still going to have state testing this school year. I know Georgia has already canceled and given it a kind of like a free year for this coming school year, but it's really looking at the opportunities that we missed, having to build on those, but just keep the momentum going, and to let teachers know that, one, it's okay. You know what, they're going to, like Jesse said, it's not just the summer slide, it's the last 9 week slide for us. I mean, it was the whole last 9 weeks plus summer
plus then coming back in August if we start on time, but really understanding where kids are and meeting their needs, but at an accelerated rate, because we don't have time to spare, especially in schools where, you know, we're looking at poverty, where we're looking at, you know, English as a second language. We have to provide the most opportunities for those kids so that they are not just impacted by COVID-19, but impacted for the rest of their life. You know, if we look at in Florida, if a third grade student takes the standards test and they get a level 1, they're retained. So this could really impact children for years to come if we're not really able to prepare our teachers, prepare our schools for when they do come back, and what instruction has to be rigorous. But we do have to stop and think about, Jesse said, that human connection. You know, kids need that face-to-face. Kids are used to hugging and talking to their teacher about their problems. Like who you know, think of, as far as, and this is the scary part of COVID, think of teachers as first reporters. How many kids really struggled with, beyond being hungry, other things that happened at home that no one has been able to report on. So those are just the social emotional side that we have a lot to prepare for, opening our doors back in the fall. Getting teachers prepared. How are they going to handle situations? How are they going to help students, not on the social emotional side, but to keep moving with instruction, but that human side too, kind of helping them balance. Looking at the learning outcomes, it is going to be a challenge because we did a lot of virtual work. Students submitted things online, students returned packets. But how do we really know what they know? We're not going to until those doors open back up. And as much as virtual instruction was amazing, these cool lessons, we had teachers Skyping with scientists, all of this is great, but not all kids were able to engage in it. And how do we know what they really learned from these? How do we know the why behind it, as far as what did they get out of all of that? We're not going to know until we get them in person.
And Phyllis, I'm going to shift to you. We also got a question in the chat box, and I think your role could certainly talk about that collaboration of how, in addition to learning outcomes, what you do on a more of a district level to coordinate efforts, to look at best practices, particularly in this age of, I mean, all of our educators shifted online like amazingly, but it was also something that we never engaged in. And me teaching for Mason, I had to teach a whole class. I had to take a whole class on how to teach online prior to teaching online. We made educators K through 12 do it in like 2 weeks, right? And so and it's a hard thing to do. And so where in addition to kind of maybe talking a little bit about where Jennifer and Jesse were, but what else at the district levels are, what the collaboration looks like as far as best practices when you talk about online learning, if you wouldn't mind talking to that a little bit too, Phyllis.
Sure. So one, while there have been challenges, there have also been great opportunities for collaboration. So the time has given superintendents one time to meet bi-weekly with our state superintendent of public education. So imagine 200 superintendents across Virginia having 2 phone calls a week, 90 minutes. You know, I have a lot of respect for our superintendent of education. However, in a year's time, probably I would interact with him maybe four times, just very frankly. I mean, you know, but now it's twice a week. And you know, this is a moment for us to redefine education. I think, you know, our lesson here is not to return to the same thing, okay? We have a platform. It's not perfect, but we are working toward that. We have talked as superintendents around, so how do you have snow days anymore when you have virtual learning? Because technically, you could not just technically, we have stood up our divisions and it didn't matter what the weather was, what's happening outside. So I do think it is an opportunity, at least state to state. I'm not sure we're ready for a national piece just yet because we have different standards in every state. We have standards, but the Florida standards is different than the Georgia standards, is different from Virginia standards. They have pieces that run through them. So we would need a national standards movement first around that. But the collaboration has been there. I've also enjoyed talking with my Northern Virginia superintendent colleagues weekly. What's happening? What are the lessons we're learning? Why, you know, it's about sharing, very much as we did when I was in grad school at Mason. You know, we can sometimes watch our colleagues and they can share with us. I call it, you know, the Freyer model. Here's my good non-example. Here's my good example, and then here's a good non-example. You know, I would be remiss if I didn't say something around while we are very, very deeply concerned about our students who are our absolute first priority, we are also deeply concerned about how this is impacting our staffs who have to be there for our students. So one thing that we're thinking about differently is, so how do we provide childcare for staff as they return to school? Their kids could be in another neighboring division. So how do we support them by having, perhaps if their division is in school in face-to-face on Monday and on Tuesday and Thursday, but they actually are face-to-face on a different day, how do we support them? How do we support staff whose families have been impacted by COVID and they're now caring for a family member who is still hospitalized? So I would be remiss as a superintendent to not say our concern around the staff with whom we're working, because we certainly are expecting them to be great for kids, but we need to be great for them as well.
Well, and all three of you bring up that point of you're not returning to normal and you're not returning to March 2020. You're returning to what's new. And, you know, we talk about the devices that we've handed out. Do we take those back now? I mean, do we make the divide again once we're able to go back? Or as Phyllis mentioned, like snow days or flex days or however you're going to do it. We knew that those digital divides, we knew that for years. It took a pandemic to get devices into everyone's hands, but there's no returning back to March 2020. So that kind of launches me into my next question. As you think about fall 2020, which is just a few months away, no rest for the weary of our school leaders here. What are you thinking about, and what's on your mind right now? You may or may not have news from your current divisions, and as we mentioned, it's changing every day. But you know, what's your priority right now? What are you thinking about? I'll start with Jennifer, if you don't mind going first.
I think for me right now, I'm still waiting for our district to come out with a couple of parameters, but obviously, yes, I'm thinking of my teachers, keeping them safe. And really, in Florida right now, and the county I live in, everyone's required to wear a mask anywhere in public. So obviously, the little things like that, but it's the bigger picture too. You know, in schools, we teach kids, and we talked about the social emotional, we can't really stop kids from talking. I mean, this is a time where they're learning social skills, and to, you know, go back to, we have to move forward, and Phyllis said that we have to move forward, and it's hard to move forward when we have some constraints, you know, thinking about devices as far as, like I said, my school gave out some devices, but not everyone K through 5 got a device. When I think about bringing the kids back, thinking about the special area rotation, little things like that, where so many hundreds of kids rotate through. And then we have to think of the contractual as far as the teacher association and things that they're going to bring to the table too. So it's a lot to digest right now, as far as, one, reassuring that I want my teachers to feel safe to be back on campus. I want my teachers to know that they are a priority, just like our kids. And even though teaching and learning, yeah, students need to learn, but my teachers need to feel safe. So it's a lot to kind of think about as far as looking at classrooms, looking at shared space. You know, not that I have to laugh, but, you know, there was a memo talked as far as on the national level about cafeteria and having kids eat in their classroom. And I think, okay, well, wait a minute, the teacher needs a break. Like, you know, thinking about things like that. But it's just a lot to process as far as, for me, if we went to a blended model, how would that work when many of my parents at my school are
maybe work in hotels as far as house cleaning or landscaping, or jobs that aren't conducive to them to stay at home to support their kids those other 2 days. So lots of questions, lots of how is it going to impact as far as just the coming to school, the 800 kids coming in at one time, 800 kids leaving at one time. Those are big questions that we really have to really think about before bringing everyone back on campus. I'm fortunate I'm going to be able to bring some kids back as far as in July, so that we can kind of see, one, they need to come back because, you know, we need them to learn. We want them to be engaged in learning, but it'll be a good time for us to kind of test the waters before we bring everyone back on campus. It's going to be challenging, but I want to make sure that I do my part following the district as far as my district and what they say as far as guidelines, because that's the worst thing I would want to do is make a rogue decision and somebody get hurt, somebody gets sick, somebody, you know, whatever happened. So it's hard to plan when we're waiting for some further direction from the county leadership.
Yeah. And Jennifer, it sounds like maybe you all are doing like a little bit like restaurants do a little soft opening in July to see, let's work through those bugs, which sounds like an excellent idea. So Jesse, I'm going to shift to you. Fall 2020, what's on your mind? Jennifer brings up some amazing points, I'm sure, as if, you know, fall opening for school principals anyway, it's your buckets are full, your plates are full. So now what's your platter look like there?
It's wait and see, you know, and it's tough to name really specific ideas in case things change. I would say that obviously we have to assure safety. We have to assure social distancing and mask wearing especially, and sanitization is important as well. And some of that's going to be driven by the protocols that the school system provides, you know, in accordance with larger, you know, higher up groups who deal with public safety. So there is that, you know. Before this fiscal year ended, we made an attempt in my school office to purchase some things that were going to help with safety. Think like, you know, plastic guards like they have at the grocery store, you know, tape for the floor, all these types of things. And Fairfax County is going to be purchasing most of that stuff centrally and providing it to schools and giving us more guidance. So it's, like I said earlier, it's one of these things where you want to get your head around it and you don't want to be caught, you know, flat-footed. But you also don't want to move ahead too much because the system might have something to support you. So safety is going to be the most important thing, obviously. You know, I still want to keep a seed planted in my staff's mind that no matter how we come back, distance learning, we're all back, or hybrid, we'll deal with everybody's comfort, but we also need to be really intense about making up for learning gaps. It's up to us at this point. And we do have some things happening this summer that I hope a lot of parents take advantage of, but it's hard to control for that, right? And they still won't cover all the stuff that we lost. So there's that. The other thing that I will be planting a seed with my staff is that if we come back with some kind of hybrid model or a continued distance learning model that maybe has different requirements or expectations to it, there are people in some job groups who will need to do different things. Okay, I mean, there are certain jobs that are really important and are very busy jobs when we are at school. But in a distance learning environment like we just went through in the spring, where you prioritize by language arts and math instruction, there are some people who, depending on the school, depending on their role, weren't doing nearly as much as some other people as well. So we've got to keep everybody actively engaged and busy, and some people might get pulled into some things that are more managing safety or supporting some other disciplines, depending on how we can make their primary role work out. So it's basically, we're all in this together. It's so cliche, but people do need to kind of step out of their comfort zone and help with everything. But outside of that, it's a lot of waiting to see what the guidance is going to be to get a specific plan. And the longer we wait, the more clear that picture will become. So we all better be very, very ready for a super busy mid-August because we're going to have to mobilize quickly with the latest information.
As if August wasn't normally busy in schools, right? Getting ready for the normal way, that shift and pivot on new information and obviously working with your health departments. Phyllis, what's that look like for you as a school leader, as a district leader?
Yes, thank you. So to piggyback on some things that Jennifer and Jesse, said, the safety and the health and the well-being of our students is the thread throughout. That's fall, winter, spring, summer. That is our thread throughout the year, and even looking at future years for our students and our staff. Um, as it relates, Virginia has a recovery plan that has been released to the state superintendents. We still are digesting it quite a bit. The plan has to be submitted by every school division, and it also has to have we have to partner with our health department in submitting the plan, because just as we think, or we know here in Northern Virginia right now, in some areas, the cases have been declining, but there are things that are happening and that could increase cases. And at some point, there's likely to be some cases even in schools. And then we have to look at, so how do we close? Do we close that particular school? Do we close a network of schools around that? So it's interesting that we spend a lot of time talking about reopening, but we have to also consider that we may be in a closing situation again, and planning for that and anticipating that. Right now, as part of Virginia's recovery plan, programs such as sports, such as large group music and arts, because that came through the Q&A, those classes would have to be at the cohort level. So for an elementary student, it is likely to mean that music is going to be in the classroom where the teacher pushes in, as opposed to having kids travel throughout the building, because as they travel, so does everything else that is with them travel. And so just as we're safe at home, you may be safer in your classroom than in larger communal spaces such as the library, the gym. So we will have those things, but I see them being pushed in to the classroom. I'm going to date myself somewhat, but in the 60s, when I was in elementary school, that's what we had. And even as an early teacher in the 80s, art was in my classroom. Our school was undergoing a renovation. PE was in the hallway adjacent to my classroom. Certainly as a division leader, the pandemic is impacting our economy, as I stated a little bit earlier. So what I put forward in my budget might look different than what I did a year ago. And so the accounting of these things, we are very happy and grateful for the dollars of the CARES money from the feds regarding this, K-12 as well as in higher ed. And so, but we're gonna have to put forward a budget. So things will still progress. I've got some renaming. I've got a middle school, our board agreed last week, just on Thursday, to look at a renaming, or at least to start a process regarding renaming, because that's something else that's happening in the forefront of our country right now. And it's with that equity piece, does everyone matter, and to what degree? And so our boards are wrestling. This is a big thing that we're wrestling with in terms of the reopening, but we have other things to wrestle with, and access, and who gets to be in what classes and how do we support all of our learners, whether they need more assistance or whether they're ready to fly. I also think this is an opportunity, and I don't think I said this before, we have some very strong, solid learners who could progress in a way. While we may have not shifted, because of the schools with whom we are working right now, our conversation may have been more on our families who need us more right now, but we all have in each of our schools students who are really ready, able, and could, through a virtual platform, accelerate and lending the support to those students as well. So differentiation is going to be an important part of fall 2020. It's been important, but it will be even more important.
And I think as we kind of wind down, we've got probably 5 minutes or so left. There was one question in the chat, and I know our states are a little bit different, but when we talk about kind of returning to those assessment programs and returning to testing and accountability programs, what are you all thinking about that? Any recommendations for those? I know Virginia has not yet come forward. I believe Florida said they were going to go forward with their assessment. Any thoughts on, you know, what you would recommend if you had the ear of those listening who might be in charge?
I'd recommend they continue to not have them. Hey, look, there was not a Virginia SOL test this year. I'm an elementary school perspective, right? And the world did not end. And the truth is, when kids come back and elementary school teachers assess kids to see what those learning losses are, they're not going to give an SOL test. They're going to give a better diagnostic test, like a developmental reading assessment or things that they're trained to do that have instructional implications. We're going to do those things, not a standardized, you know, online multiple choice format test like the kind we use for accreditation. So if we could get something amazing out of this, it might be that it gets relooked at, and there is another another replacement way to assess kids in schools that kind of uses a growth model and uses assessments that teachers would authentically use. So my recommendation is no SOLs forever.
Well, and I think you make an excellent point that it's about student growth, and so our teachers can communicate what kids are doing and communicate that with parents. And I know parents obviously will be sitting on the edge of their chairs wanting to know, how much did my child learn? Or shockingly, maybe they progressed and I wasn't even aware of that. So I think that communication obviously from school leaders and teachers is going to be so critical, because you know, we can get that information to parents, and we can get it without, as you said, without an SOL test. Phyllis, I saw your hand kind of flared. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I was giving the yes, definitely. I also would like to say, just as we have our assessments for students, we also assess our staff in our evaluation. So here's another opportunity for us to relook at how we give good formative feedback to staff who are really learning some things and who are extending themselves. We've got to have a safety for them to be able to do the things that we have expected of them that we thought was further out. And so we're going to give grace to our students regarding our testing. How do we give that grace to our staff while still supporting them and leading them and pushing them as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Jennifer, did you want to add on to anything that Jesse or
I think one thing too, as far as we're already, as far as in whatever state, dealing with a lot of stress as far as in general, things that are, and Dr. Phyllis mentioned this earlier, things that are going on in our country, not just because of COVID, but just because of what's going on in our country in general.
There's so many opportunities right now for learning that maybe is not going to be covered on any type of standard, but it's education that needs to happen. And to kind of take that pressure off as far as the stress that the testing environment brings onto a school is people don't understand that, and the time that it takes, and as far as reading, math, and science for my fifth graders, it's a lot of time spent testing, where right now we're already going to be playing catch up. And we go back here in Florida, we're scheduled to start school August 10th. So I think as far as to relieve that pressure, at least either that or a hold harmless year, as far as either if we test but it hold harmless, because we have to be able to look at schools on the big picture, and I get that, but I think for teachers and for students and families, a hold harmless year, as far as it has to be for 2021, just so everyone gets back to what the new normal is going to be. We're not going back the same. Dr. Phyllis had mentioned that too, but we need to learn from it and see kind of really what would the year be without testing? How much more could students learn if that barrier was taken away?
I see Brett has jumped on, which tells us that we're coming to the end of our hour here. And I think based on the questions and your all expertise, we could have spent all afternoon talking about this. So I can't thank you enough. We're proud of you as Mason alumni, because you really represent what we do here at Mason, but keep doing the amazing things that you're doing in our schools and schools divisions, and come back and see us and share your knowledge as you learn more. So thank you so much. Brett?
Maureen, I think you took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you so much, because the panel does embody what we want as Mason, what we strive for, and what I'm proud of as a faculty and someone who's gotten into administration here, of what our alumni are doing. I do want to say, thank you to the panel so much for taking time. To Maureen's point, I think we need to have a couple more of these. I think we need more of Mason being that confluence, that converting point to have these conversations. I will say, as someone, my kids are young, they're not yet into that system yet, but to me, what this has shown as a business faculty is the power of K through 12 in our society has never been more apparent. The importance of K through 12 work culture and society does not function if our children are not being looked after and being cared for. And you guys do an incredible job at that. And if we're not backing you with our pocketbooks more as parents now, then shame on us, because it has been proved over and over again these last 3 months. We need you. We are so thankful for all the hard work you guys do. I'm from a family of K through 12 educators, so right, they would slap me upside the head if I didn't say what an amazing job you guys do. We are thankful for it. Thank you to the audience for spending the hour with us. Absolutely want to do more of these. We have more programming coming up next week and into the beginning of July. On the technology market, on human resources, on new ventures and startups. So look for those emails from the alumni chapter. To Phyllis, Jennifer, and Jesse, and Maureen, thank you so much. I'll let everybody get going with their day. We appreciate it. So with that, I will finally say my last final thank you, and see you all soon, and stay safe.